There's a moment when silence hits harder than the betrayal itself. That strange stillness after the truth settles. When you finally accept that someone you trusted simply wasn't who you believed they were. In Stoic philosophy, this shock is not ignored, but understood. The Stoics taught that much of our pain comes from the collision between our expectations and the reality of human nature. People disappoint because they act from insecurity, fear, jealousy, or confusion. And while their choices may leave deep wounds, your peace comes from mastering the meaning you attach to the moment. Hurt grows in unanswered questions, but healing begins when you shift from searching for explanations to choosing how you will rise from the experience. What if the person who harmed you is no longer the one holding the power? That question alone changes the emotional landscape inside you. According to Marcus Aurelius, the true injury is rarely the event itself. It's the continuous replaying of it in our mind. Betrayal lingers when we keep feeding it with attention, giving it more authority than it deserves. Stoic wisdom teaches that real freedom begins when you stop giving your past the power to dominate your present. This doesn't deny the pain, it simply stops it from becoming your identity. Every moment you revisit the memory, you hand over another piece of your peace. Letting go is not surrender. It is reclaiming your mental territory. The truth is, nobody can betray you without revealing themselves in the process. Their actions expose their inner world, not your value. Epictetus warned that the real suffering comes not from what people do, but from the meaning we attach to what they do. If someone broke your trust, lied, abandoned you, or acted out of cowardice, that tells you far more about their character than yours. Stoicism teaches you to observe behavior without internalizing it. When you separate what they did from who you are, the pain transforms into clarity. Betrayal becomes information you can use. Information that strengthens your boundaries, sharpens your intuition, and teaches you who does and doesn't deserve a place in your life moving forward. Healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with reclaiming your mind from the story you're repeating. Stoics believed forgiveness isn't a gift for the offender. It's a release for your own spirit. Forgiveness doesn't excuse what happened. It neutralizes its emotional grip. It stops the internal replay. If you're not ready to forgive, start with neutrality. Start by refusing to let resentment dictate your decisions. Emotions are natural, but attaching yourself to them is optional. You can feel the anger without becoming ruled by it. You can acknowledge hurt without letting it steer your future. That emotional separation is where healing first takes shape. You don't rise above hurt by confronting them. You rise by confronting your own reactions. Stoicism emphasizes that the ultimate power lies in your ability to govern yourself. When someone wrongs you, the instinct is to explain, defend, fix, or retaliate. But none of that restores peace. The quiet victory comes from mastering your internal environment so well that external chaos cannot pull you out of alignment. When you pause before reacting, when you choose intention over impulse, you reclaim control. This is what Stoics meant by winning without fighting, rising above the situation by refusing to let it shape the person you become. Every betrayal is a teacher, but only when you stop replaying the wound and start studying the lesson. Stoics believed that nothing happens without giving you a chance to grow. Painful experiences refine your judgment and teach you to protect your peace with new boundaries. Maybe the lesson is that you trusted too fast. Maybe it's that you ignored warning signs because you wanted to see the good. Or maybe it's simply the truth that you have no control over how others show up, only how you rise after they don't. When you shift from emotional reaction to wisdom extraction, betrayal becomes evolution. You walk forward with sharper insight, deeper strength, and a clearer understanding of who aligns with your path. Your peace begins to return the moment you stop asking, "Why did they do this?" and start asking, "What do I do next?" The Stoics were clear. Digging for motives only keeps you trapped in the past. People act out of their own inner battles, their wounds, insecurities, fears, and blind spots. You cannot make sense of someone who doesn't make sense to themselves, but you can take ownership of your next chapter. Do you distance yourself? Rebuild differently? Pour energy into your own growth? When you shift the focus from their actions to your direction, the future becomes less intimidating. Peace is not found in the answers you never got. It is found in the decisions you make now. Pain changes you, but it doesn't have to harden you. It can refine you. One of the most powerful Stoic teachings is the idea that adversity doesn't shape your character, it reveals it. When someone hurts you, you're standing at a crossroads. Become bitter or become wiser. Bitterness is the default path, the easy one, the one your emotions push you toward. But wisdom is the chosen path, the one where you pause, breathe, and decide that what happened will not turn you into a version of yourself you don't respect. Seneca said that difficult people are training partners, not enemies. They teach you endurance, patience, and self-mastery. The person who wronged you may never apologize, but the strength you develop while healing becomes something they can never take away. There's a moment in the healing process when you realize you're not actually angry at the person. You're angry at the story you told yourself about who they were. And that realization stings, but it's also liberating. The Stoics would say that suffering intensifies when we cling to illusions, to the fantasy we created about someone's potential behavior rather than the reality of who they truly are. When you let go of the story and accept the truth, the disappointment begins to lose its power. You stop trying to rewrite the past and instead start rewriting your future. The more you detach from what you hoped they would be, the more space you create for the kind of people who won't require you to lower your boundaries or question your worth. Another Stoic insight that cuts deep is the idea that no one can truly harm you unless you grant them permission. Not permission to act. People will act however they want, but permission to affect your inner world, your self-view, your calm. When you realize this, something shifts. You begin to audit what you allow into your mind. Thoughts like, "Why did they do this to me?" get replaced with, "Why am I giving this so much of my energy?" A betrayal becomes painful only as long as you keep feeding it attention. The Stoics believed that emotional suffering often comes from the gap between what we can control and what we try to control. Once you realign your focus back to what's yours, your reactions, your mindset, your choices, you begin to reclaim your equilibrium. Here's the quiet truth no one tells you. The people who hurt you once rarely stop hurting you until you decide you've had enough. Stoics emphasized the necessity of boundaries, not as a form of punishment, but as a form of self-respect. Boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. They don't shut people out, they keep your peace safe. When you've been betrayed, a boundary becomes the bridge back to your emotional freedom. It tells you, I can love you from a distance. I can care about you without giving you full access. I can wish you well without letting you walk through my life carelessly. Strength isn't refusing to feel. It's refusing to be misused. And then comes the moment when you realize that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. That visual is harsh, but it's exactly how the Stoics framed it. Your anger doesn't imprison them. It imprisons you. They might be sleeping peacefully while you're awake, replaying every hurtful detail. Stoic thought encourages you to release resentment, not because they deserve mercy, but because you deserve sleep, health, clarity, and peace. Letting go doesn't erase the past. It simply stops it from bleeding into your future. When you choose release over rumination, your mind becomes lighter, your heart stronger, and your spirit freer. Let this sink in. The person who hurt you may never recognize the damage they caused, but you can still choose to stop carrying it. This is where emotional independence begins. Stoics believed the worst kind of captivity is mental captivity, the prison we build inside ourselves by reliving moments that no longer exist. The more you cling to the pain, the more deeply you anchor yourself to someone who has already moved on. But when you let go, you break the chain. You take back your narrative. You reclaim the parts of you that you lost while trying to understand something that was never meant to make sense. Before we continue, if this message is helping you see your situation with clearer eyes, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to PSYCHOVEST. Your support helps these messages reach more people who are trying to rebuild their peace and rise from difficult experiences. Now, let's keep going deeper. There's a point in every healing journey where your perspective flips, when you stop seeing the betrayal as a wound and start seeing it as a wake-up call. Stoicism teaches that every setback holds a hidden advantage for the person willing to look closely. Maybe the betrayal forced you to notice patterns you ignored. Maybe it pushed you to confront your own people-pleasing tendencies. Maybe it revealed parts of your identity you abandoned just to keep someone else comfortable. Pain becomes purpose the moment you ask not, "Why did this happen?" but, "What is this teaching me about myself?" That shift marks the beginning of emotional maturity. You start seeing the experience not as a loss, but as a revelation. One of the most powerful things you can do after being hurt is detach with dignity. The Stoics saw detachment not as coldness, but as clarity. The ability to step back and see the situation without emotional fog. It means choosing silence over argument, distance over chaos, and inner peace over the need to be understood. Detachment doesn't require anger, it requires acceptance. It says, "I see who you are now, and because I value my well-being, I refuse to stay in environments that starve my spirit." Detachment is not closing your heart. It's closing the door to environments that diminish your worth. Another crucial Stoic principle is the idea of internal anchoring, grounding yourself so deeply in your own values that betrayal cannot uproot you. When you build your identity on someone else's approval, their betrayal feels like an earthquake. But when you build your identity on your integrity, your discipline, your mindset, your purpose, then their actions may shake you, but cannot collapse you. Internal anchoring means your peace is not available for negotiation. It means your worth is not determined by who stays or who goes. It means you stand firm, not because life is easy, but because you have become unshakable. There's a difficult truth you eventually have to face. Healing doesn't require closure from them. It requires clarity within you. One of the biggest traps after betrayal is waiting for someone to acknowledge the pain they caused. You wait for an apology, for an explanation, for a moment of honesty that finally makes the situation make sense. But the Stoics remind us that closure is rarely something another person gives. It's something you create. You close the chapter when you stop expecting the person who hurt you to suddenly become self-aware. You close the chapter when you stop chasing validation from someone incapable of providing it. And strangely, the moment you stop waiting for closure is often the moment you finally feel free. Another transformation begins when you stop asking, "How could they do this?" and start asking, "Why did I tolerate this for so long?" This shift isn't self-blame, it's self-awareness. Hurt becomes wisdom when you examine not just what they did, but what made you accept certain behaviors, excuses, or inconsistencies. The Stoics believed in using pain as a mirror. Every emotional wound reflects something deeper about your boundaries, your self-respect, or your unmet needs. When you look inward, not outward, betrayal becomes less about what someone took from you and more about what you now refuse to give away so easily. Your kindness, your loyalty, your trust, your time. Eventually, you arrive at a point where you understand that not everyone, is meant to continue with you on your journey. Some people are chapters, not the whole book. Stoics embraced the impermanence of relationships, acknowledging that people change, circumstances shift, and paths diverge. The person who hurt you may have served a purpose, teaching you resilience, sharpening your intuition, or revealing your blind spots. And now their role in your life is complete. When you stop forcing temporary people into permanent positions, you protect yourself from repeat heartbreak. Healing isn't about holding tighter. It's about releasing what no longer aligns with your growth. There comes a moment where you realize that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Stoicism teaches that forgiveness can be a silent, private act, a decision to clear your heart so you don't carry emotional baggage into the future. You can forgive someone and never speak to them again. You can forgive someone and still enforce strict boundaries. You can forgive someone and still choose distance. Forgiveness is about lightening your load, not reopening the door to someone who has proven they can't be trusted with your peace. That's not cruelty. It's maturity. It's understanding that healing requires both compassion and protection. Another layer of healing comes from understanding that your mind exaggerates pain the moment you attach identity to it. The Stoics emphasized this constantly. You are not what happened to you. You are what you decide to become because of it. When you repeat to yourself, "I was betrayed," the mind turns it into a label. But when you tell yourself, "I learned a painful lesson," the mind turns it into a stepping stone. The same event, reframed through a Stoic lens, transforms from a scar into a source of strength. And once you shift that inner narrative, you stop identifying with the wound and start identifying with your resilience. There's also a point in the healing journey where silence becomes your superpower. The Stoics valued silence not as avoidance, but as strength, a refusal to waste words or energy on people who cannot hear you, respect you, or meet you where you are. When you stop explaining yourself, defending your decisions, or trying to correct their perception, you regain emotional sovereignty. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. It's you choosing your peace over your pride, your growth over your ego, your future over your need to be understood. Sometimes the most powerful response is none at all. The moment you stop needing people to act the way you expected is the moment peace walks back into your life. Stoicism teaches that expectations are a form of emotional gambling, betting on someone's potential instead of accepting their patterns. When you detach from expectations, you detach from disappointment. This doesn't mean you lower your standards. It means you stop assuming people will live up to them. You judge them by their actions, not their promises, by their consistency, not their charm. And when their behavior reveals who they truly are, you believe it the first time. Acceptance becomes protection. Another breakthrough happens when you realize that peace is not something you find or pursue, it's something you build. The Stoics believed in construction, not discovery. Peace is built through your habits, your routines, your choices, and the company you keep. It's built when you practice emotional discipline, when you walk away from drama, when you create an environment where your mind can rest instead of constantly defend itself. Once you start building peace intentionally, betrayal becomes a temporary disturbance, not a permanent identity. It becomes another experience you outgrow, not a lifelong wound. You'll eventually notice that healing changes your standards. What you tolerated before becomes intolerable. What you accepted without question now feels like a violation. And what once hurt you deeply now serves as a reminder of how far you've come. Stoicism teaches that standards are not barriers, they are safeguards. They ensure that the kind of people who hurt you in the past never make it back into your future. You become more selective, more aware, more aligned with your values. And this shift isn't about distrust, it's about self-respect. When you've been hurt, the most transformative thing you can do is start investing in yourself again. Betrayal drains your energy outward, toward the past, toward the person, toward the event. Stoicism teaches you to redirect that energy inward. Pour it into your health, your goals, your disciplines, your growth. Recommit to your routines, your purpose, your identity. When you focus on building yourself, the person who hurt you fades into irrelevance, not because you forced yourself to forget, but because you built a life where their memory holds no real weight anymore. There's a powerful shift that happens when you realize you don't need the world to understand your pain for you to rise from it. One of the deepest Stoic teachings is that your healing is not a public event. It's an internal evolution. You don't need to justify what you went through. You don't need to convince anyone of the impact it had on you, and you don't need permission to move forward. When you stop performing your pain for others to validate, you reclaim the privacy of your own growth. Healing silently becomes a form of strength. People may never know the battles you fought, but they will see the clarity, the calm, and the confidence that emerges from your journey. Healing also becomes easier when you understand that your thoughts are not facts. The Stoics emphasized that the mind often becomes the greatest source of suffering after betrayal, not because of the event, but because of the meaning we attach to it. Your mind will whisper that you weren't enough, that you should have known better, that you somehow caused their actions. But none of these thoughts reflect reality. They reflect emotion, raw, wounded, vulnerable emotion. And emotions distort perception. When you begin challenging the thoughts that appear after betrayal, you weaken their grip. You separate the facts from the feelings, the truth from the story your pain wants to tell. And in that separation, clarity returns. There's a moment in your healing process where you start to understand that some people hurt you not because you deserved pain, but because they lacked the capacity to offer anything else. Stoicism teaches that you cannot expect maturity from someone who has not cultivated it. You cannot expect honesty from someone who has practiced deception as a way of life. You cannot expect loyalty from someone who is loyal only to their own comfort. When you accept that people behave according to their level of development, not your level of worthiness, you stop taking their actions personally. The betrayal becomes less of a personal attack and more of a reflection of their internal limitations. Another insight from Stoic philosophy is that suffering decreases the moment resistance decreases. Pain prolongs itself when we fight the reality of what happened, when we replay the event, analyze their intentions, wish things were different. We keep the wound open. Acceptance, however, begins to close it. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means acknowledging that what happened, happened, and no amount of overthinking can reverse it. Once you stop resisting reality, you free your mind to focus on your future instead of your past. Acceptance doesn't remove the pain instantly, but it removes the friction that keeps you stuck. Healing deepens even further when you understand that betrayal is often the universe redirecting you. Stoicism teaches that every event has two layers, the surface pain and the deeper purpose. The surface pain is obvious, the hurt, the confusion, the disappointment, but the deeper purpose is revealed over time. Maybe you were being pushed away from people who would have limited your growth. Maybe you were being taught clarity, boundaries, or emotional strength. Maybe the betrayal is the very thing that creates the version of you who can rise to the next level of your life. Stoics believed that setbacks are rarely setbacks. They're interruptions designed to protect your destiny. There's also a stage of healing where you begin to experience gratitude, not for the pain, but for what it sculpted within you. You start noticing the new strength in your voice, the new firmness in your boundaries, the new depth in your self-awareness. You realize you're not the same version of yourself who tolerated what you once tolerated, and that transformation is priceless. Stoicism teaches that hardships carve wisdom into your character. They refine your vision, build your resilience, and guide you toward the life you're meant to live. Eventually, you stop mourning what you lost and start appreciating what the loss made you gain. As your healing advances, something quiet but profound begins to happen. You become harder to disturb. The same situations that once shook you no longer have the same pull. The people who once drained you no longer have access to your energy. The patterns you once fell into no longer tempt you. Pain, when processed correctly, becomes a filter for your future. It teaches you to choose carefully, to trust slowly, to value depth over intensity, consistency over charm, and actions over words. Your peace becomes non-negotiable, not because you've become guarded, but because you've become wise. This is also where you start to notice that your spirit feels lighter when you stop trying to change people. One of the greatest freedoms Stoicism teaches is the realization that you can't save someone from their own character. You can't teach honesty to someone who benefits from deceit. You can't force accountability onto someone who lives in denial. You can't give emotional maturity to someone who has never practiced it. Once you release the responsibility of fixing others, you reclaim the energy needed to build yourself. And that shift alone can change the entire direction of your life. You'll also find that solitude becomes more comforting than company that drains you. The Stoic view is that peace is found not in the presence of people, but in the presence of your own alignment. When you're healing, you may outgrow old circles, old relationships, old conversations. This is not isolation, it's evolution. You begin to seek what nourishes you instead of what distracts you. You start valuing depth over noise. And you realize that being alone while healing is not loneliness, it's preparation. It's you rebuilding your inner foundation so that future relationships exist on stronger, healthier terms. As you continue healing, you might even find yourself grateful that the person who hurt you is no longer close to you. The distance becomes a comfort, the separation becomes clarity, and the lack of access becomes peace. This is a milestone in healing, when you stop desperately wanting someone back and start quietly appreciating that they're gone. Stoicism teaches that once the lesson is learned, the attachment fades. And as the attachment fades, freedom rises. There's a turning point in healing where you finally stop asking what the betrayal meant about them and start understanding what it revealed about you. Not your flaws, but your capacity. Your capacity to love deeply, to trust sincerely, to give wholeheartedly. Stoic philosophy teaches that your willingness to care is not a weakness. It's a reflection of your character. The betrayal didn't diminish your goodness. It simply highlighted that not everyone can carry the weight of the loyalty you offer. Once you see that your kindness was not the problem, their inability to honor it was, the shame dissolves. You stop internalizing their actions as reflections of your worth, and you start seeing them as reflections of their limitations. Healing also sharpens your intuition in ways you couldn't have imagined before. The Stoics believed that wisdom is often born from emotional injury, not because pain is noble, but because pain forces you to pay attention. You begin to notice subtle energy shifts, inconsistencies in behavior, and the quiet ways people reveal their intentions. Patterns become clearer. Words lose their power unless supported by consistent action. You start trusting what you feel, not just what you hear. Betrayal heightens your discernment, not so you can live in fear, but so you can live with clarity. And clarity is one of the most powerful forms of self-protection. There will also be a moment when you realize that the betrayal forced you to confront parts of yourself you might have ignored, the self-doubt you've been carrying, the unhealed wounds you've been avoiding, the lack of boundaries you've been afraid to enforce. Stoicism teaches that every hardship is an opportunity to deepen your understanding of yourself. Pain pulls hidden truths to the surface. And the beauty of this is that once you see those truths, you can no longer deny them. You start doing the inner work, strengthening your self-worth, reinforcing your boundaries, and learning to choose people who choose you with the same sincerity. The betrayal becomes the spark of your transformation. Another powerful shift happens when you stop using betrayal as a reason to close your heart and start using it as a reason to open it more wisely. The Stoics understood that after pain, many people lose the courage to trust again. But courage doesn't mean trusting blindly. It means trusting with discernment. It means allowing connection without abandoning yourself. It means opening your heart with awareness, not fear. When you heal correctly, your heart doesn't harden. It evolves. It becomes more patient, more perceptive, more intentional. You stop falling for intensity and start valuing consistency. You stop chasing validation and start choosing alignment. Then comes the moment when you realize that peace is not the absence of pain. It's the absence of attachment to pain. Stoicism teaches that suffering begins where acceptance ends. And once you truly accept what happened, the emotional charge weakens, the memory stops hurting, the mental replay loses its grip. You can think about the event without sinking into the emotion of it. That's when you know you're reclaiming your mind. You're no longer reacting from old wounds. You're responding from new wisdom. Peace returns the moment you stop reopening the door to a story that already ended. Healing also reveals a surprising truth. Sometimes the people who hurt you were operating from their own unresolved wounds. Stoics did not excuse harmful behavior, but they understood the psychology behind it. A person who betrays may be acting from fear, insecurity, ego, or emotional immaturity. Their actions often say more about what they lack internally than what you lacked externally. And once you see this clearly, you stop personalizing the pain. You start observing it with emotional distance. That distance doesn't erase the hurt, but it gives you control over its meaning. Their behavior becomes a case study, not a curse. As you grow, you begin noticing that life feels lighter when you stop trying to control what you cannot control. This is one of the core Stoic principles. Focus on what's within your power. You can't control how someone treats you, but you can control whether you stay. You can't control whether they apologize, but you can control whether you heal. You can't control their lack of integrity, but you can control your boundaries, your standards, and your future choices. The more you shift your energy away from what's outside your influence, the more peace you create inside your own mind. Eventually, you experience a powerful realization. You survived something you once thought would break you. And not only did you survive, you grew. There's strength inside you now that didn't exist before. Your emotional muscles are sharper. Your sense of self is stronger. Your awareness is deeper. Stoicism teaches that adversity creates the kind of resilience that comfort never could. The person you're becoming is not a result of the betrayal itself, but of your decision to rise in spite of it. You stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as a fighter who turned pain into power. If this message is helping you reconnect with your strength and see your situation from a clearer angle, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to PSYCHOVEST. Each interaction helps this content reach more people who are rebuilding their peace and reclaiming their lives. There comes a moment in your healing where you start to recognize the power of emotional detachment, not the cold, hardened kind, but the calm, steady kind that Stoic philosophy teaches. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop over-investing in people who haven't earned that level of access. You begin to understand that not every emotion requires expression, not every thought requires action, and not every betrayal requires confrontation. Detachment becomes the quiet confidence that allows you to walk away without resentment, to let go without bitterness, and to reclaim your peace without seeking revenge. This is strength in its most mature form. choosing inner stability over external validation. As your healing deepens, you start to realize that your mind is quieter when you stop rehearsing the conversations you'll never have. Stoicism teaches that the mind often clings to unfinished dialogue because it's searching for a sense of control. You imagine telling them how they made you feel. You imagine the perfect words that would make them understand. You imagine the moment when they finally get it. But the truth is, none of these imagined scenarios bring closure. They only extend the pain. When you begin releasing the need to be understood, your thoughts loosen their grip, your heart softens, and the mental noise slowly fades into quiet acceptance. Another breakthrough happens when you stop trying to assign meaning to someone else's choices. The Stoics believed that people act according to their nature, their fears, their desires, their insecurities, their upbringing. Betrayal often has less to do with malice and more to do with a person's inability to rise to the level of maturity that loyalty requires. When you stop analyzing their decisions, you take back the power your mind gave away. You stop asking, why did they do this? And start understanding, this is who they are right now. That clarity frees you from hoping they will change, and it frees you from trying to fix what was never yours to repair. Healing also brings you face to face with your own patterns. For many people, betrayal exposes a history of ignoring red flags, minimizing your discomfort to keep the peace, or prioritizing someone else's feelings over your own intuition. This isn't failure, it's conditioning. Stoicism encourages self-examination as a path to growth. You begin to ask deeper questions. Why did I stay silent when something felt off? Why did I override my instincts? Why did I accept behavior that contradicted my values? These questions aren't meant to punish you. They're meant to empower you. They help you build a future where your intuition is honored, your boundaries are respected, and your voice is no longer suppressed. There's also a point in your recovery where you start noticing how much lighter life feels when you're not carrying emotional burdens that aren't yours. The Stoics often spoke about the danger of carrying other people's chaos. When someone behaves recklessly, dishonestly, or selfishly, they create emotional debris, and without boundaries, that debris can land in your life. Healing teaches you to recognize what belongs to you and what doesn't. Their actions, not yours to fix. Their choices, not yours to justify. Their guilt, not yours to carry. Your emotional environment becomes clearer once you stop cleaning up messes you didn't create. Then comes the realization that forgiveness is not a one-time event. It's a process, and sometimes a slow one. Stoic forgiveness isn't about excusing behavior or minimizing wrongdoing. It's about gradually removing the emotional poison from your system. Some days you feel free. Other days the memory stings. Both are part of the journey. Forgiveness unfolds in layers. Anger softens. Sadness eases. The emotional charge weakens, clarity returns. You don't rush it, you don't force it. You simply commit to not letting bitterness take root. Over time, the memory loses its sharp edges, and what once felt like a wound becomes something far gentler. A scar that doesn't define you, only reminds you of how far you've traveled. As you grow stronger, you might find that the betrayal no longer dominates your thoughts, and this can feel unfamiliar at first. There's almost an emptiness where the pain used to be. But that emptiness isn't loss, it's space. Space to rebuild. Space to rediscover yourself. Space to reconnect with passions, dreams, and goals that the betrayal once overshadowed. Stoic philosophy teaches that the mind needs room to breathe, and healing creates that room. You begin filling that space with things that bring you stability, joy, purpose, and direction. The betrayal stops being a central chapter in your story. It becomes a page you've already turned. And eventually, something remarkable happens. You notice that you're no longer triggered by the memory in the same way. The emotional charge dissolves. the intensity fades. You can talk about it without your voice shaking. You can think about it without your heart racing. You can remember it without feeling the urge to revisit the past. This is the Stoic path, when wisdom replaces emotion, when understanding replaces confusion, when acceptance replaces resistance. This is the moment you realize you're no longer healing. You're healed, at least from that chapter. There's a moment in your healing journey when you begin to understand that reclaiming your peace isn't about forgetting the betrayal. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned during the struggle. Betrayal has a way of pulling you away from your own identity. You stop recognizing your confidence. You stop trusting your intuition. You stop believing in your own strength. Stoicism teaches that the goal of healing is not to erase the memory, but to rebuild the self. You start reconnecting with the qualities that define you, your compassion, your ambition, your resilience. Over time, you begin to see that the betrayal didn't break you. It simply forced you to remember who you were before the pain tried to rewrite your story. Another realization unfolds when you understand that you can outgrow the version of yourself who was deeply hurt. Pain often freezes you in a specific emotional moment. The moment you discovered the truth, the moment they disappointed you, the moment your trust shattered. But as you evolve, that frozen moment becomes smaller and smaller in the context of your entire life. Stoicism teaches you to zoom out, to see the broader picture. You're not the person you were when the betrayal happened. You're wiser, calmer, more self-aware. The pain that once consumed you becomes a distant echo, not because you denied it, but because you outpaced it. Growth always moves faster than grief when you commit to becoming stronger. You also start to notice that healing makes you more present. After betrayal, the mind often oscillates between reliving the past and fearing the future, questioning whether you'll be hurt again, whether you can trust again, whether love or friendship is even safe anymore. The Stoics emphasized the importance of living in the present moment because that's where your power exists. When you stop projecting yesterday's wounds onto tomorrow's possibilities, life begins to feel fuller. You're no longer living in anticipation of pain or in memory of disappointment. You're living in the now, in the only moment you can actually shape. Another transformation happens when you realize that loyalty should never be given blindly. It should be earned through consistent action. Betrayal often exposes a painful truth. You may have been giving loyalty to someone who only gave you convenience in return. Stoicism teaches that virtue lies in actions, not intentions. Someone's promises, charm, or potential are irrelevant unless supported by their behavior. Healing sharpens this awareness. You begin to value people who show up, not people who only talk. You begin to appreciate consistency over intensity, stability over excitement, authenticity over flattery. Betrayal refines your circle, and that refinement is one of the greatest gifts adversity offers. There's also a point in your recovery where you stop wanting revenge, not because you've forgotten what happened, but because you've outgrown the need for it. The Stoics taught that revenge binds you to the perpetrator emotionally. It keeps you energetically tethered to their choices. But when you heal, something shifts. You realize the real revenge is the peace you rebuild, the happiness you rediscover, the success you create, and the strength you gain. Nothing exposes someone's irrelevance more than your ability to thrive without their presence. Revenge stops feeling like justice and starts feeling like a distraction. Your growth becomes the answer. As the journey continues, you begin seeing how many blessings were hidden behind the betrayal. This isn't toxic positivity, it's Stoic perspective. If the betrayal hadn't happened, you might still be investing in the wrong people. You might still be silencing your boundaries. You might still be shrinking yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Instead, the pain pushed you into evolution. It forced you to reevaluate your relationships, your self-worth, your patterns, and your expectations. What felt like devastation at the time turns out to be redirection. a push toward people who honor your heart and environments that nurture your spirit. You eventually recognize that part of healing is learning to stand firmly in your truth, even if someone else refuses to acknowledge it. The Stoics taught that integrity is internal, not external. It doesn't require proof or validation. You don't need the person who hurt you to admit what they did. You don't need them to agree with your perspective. You don't need them to understand the depth of the pain. Your truth is enough. Your experience is enough. Relief comes not when they validate your side, but when you stop needing them to. Their awareness is their journey. Your healing is yours. Another layer of emotional freedom appears when you stop fearing the possibility of being hurt again. Betrayal often creates a defensive shell, a belief that vulnerability is unsafe. But Stoicism teaches that vulnerability paired with wisdom is a superpower. It allows you to love with intention, trust with discernment, and connect with clarity. You stop viewing relationships as risks and start viewing them as experiences. Some will teach you, some will support you, and all will shape you. Healing replaces fear with understanding, and understanding replaces avoidance with confidence. You don't hide your heart, you simply protect it with boundaries that honor your value. There's a stage in healing where you finally begin trusting yourself again. Betrayal doesn't just damage trust in others, it damages trust in your own judgment. You replay moments, wondering how you didn't see the signs, how you allowed yourself to be vulnerable, how you misread someone so profoundly. But as time passes and clarity sharpens, you begin to see that your intuition wasn't wrong. You simply gave someone the benefit of the doubt because you lead with honesty. Stoicism teaches that trusting yourself is the foundation of emotional freedom. As you rebuild this trust, you become more confident in your ability to read people, to recognize patterns, and to protect your peace. The betrayal no longer makes you doubt your intuition. It reinforces it. Another powerful realization is that healing requires isolation before it creates expansion. There's a quiet phase where you withdraw from certain people, conversations, and environments. This isn't avoidance, it's recalibration. The Stoics emphasized solitude as a necessary step toward clarity. When you're alone with your thoughts, you can sort through what's real and what's emotional residue. You can hear your own voice without interference. You can strengthen your identity without external noise. The loneliness you feel in this phase is not emptiness, it's purification. You're clearing the clutter of old emotional attachments to make space for a more grounded version of yourself. There's also a moment where you realize that the betrayal was not the end of your story. It was a shift in your direction. Stoicism encourages you to see pain as part of the path, not a detour. You begin noticing new opportunities emerging because of the space the betrayal created. Maybe you're meeting new people who align with your values. Maybe you're discovering parts of yourself you had neglected. Maybe you're stepping into strengths you didn't know you possessed. What once felt like devastation becomes the birthplace of a new trajectory. This shift is subtle at first, but unmistakable. You're not going back to who you were. You're becoming someone more resilient, more intentional, more aligned. As your peace strengthens, you also start to understand that some people never deserved the access they had to you. This realization is painful, but liberating. Stoicism teaches that not everyone is meant to enter the inner chambers of your life. Some people belong on the surface, acquaintances, not confidants. But because of your open heart, you may have allowed someone deeper than they were equipped to go. Healing is the process of correcting that imbalance. You begin to guard your emotional doors with more discernment. Trust becomes something measured, not automatic. Loyalty becomes something reciprocal, not one-sided. And intimacy becomes something intentional, not given by default. Another transformation happens when you stop chasing people who consistently show you they don't value your presence. Betrayal often comes from people you tried to keep in your life longer than they were meant to stay. Stoicism teaches that clinging to what wants to leave is a source of suffering. The moment you allow people to exit without resisting their departure, you reclaim your dignity. You begin to see that losing people who don't appreciate you is not a loss, it's alignment. The universe removes who cannot accompany your next level. And when you embrace this truth, you stop running after what has already walked away. As healing deepens, you begin to play a different mental soundtrack. Instead of, "Why wasn't I enough?" the question becomes, "Why did I settle for so little?" This shift is powerful. It repositions your mindset from victimhood to self-realization. Stoicism teaches that every emotional injury is an invitation to elevate your standards. You begin to realize that the betrayal wasn't about your inadequacy, it was about your tolerance. You accepted scraps when you deserved consistency. You settled for potential when you deserved presence. You mistook familiarity for loyalty. This clarity becomes fuel to choose better, expect better, and demand better in every corner of your life. You also start to understand that healing doesn't require you to stop loving. It requires you to love differently, with more patience, with clearer boundaries, with a deeper awareness of your emotional capacity. Stoicism never taught emotional withdrawal, it taught emotional wisdom. You begin to love with an open heart, but a guarded spirit. Open enough to connect deeply, guarded enough to move away from anyone who repeatedly violates your peace. You don't build walls, you build gates. Gates that open for those who show integrity, consistency, and respect. As your self-awareness grows, something beautiful begins to unfold. You start showing up for yourself in ways you never did before. You speak more kindly to yourself. You give yourself grace for the mistakes you made. You treat your emotions with compassion rather than criticism. Stoicism teaches that the relationship you have with yourself is the most important one in your life. Betrayal may have shaken your trust in others, but it also called you back to the one relationship that truly defines your life, the relationship between you and your inner world. And as that bond strengthens, your entire reality transforms. There comes a time in your healing when you begin recognizing the difference between pain that teaches you and pain that traps you. In the aftermath of betrayal, it's easy to keep revisiting the hurt, analyzing every detail, replaying every moment. But eventually, you start noticing which thoughts make you stronger and which ones keep you stuck. Stoicism teaches that not all pain is meant to be carried. Some is meant to be released. You begin to understand that clinging to certain memories only reinforces emotional wounds, while letting go allows you to evolve. This is the moment when you stop nurturing the pain and start nurturing the person you're becoming. Another shift emerges when you realize that emotional wounds heal faster when you stop reopening them. There's a point where you become tired of your own thoughts, tired of replaying the betrayal, tired of analyzing the what-ifs, tired of giving someone else rent-free space in your mind. The Stoics taught that rumination is a thief of peace. When you catch yourself drifting into the past, you gently guide yourself back to the present. You remind yourself that the story is over, that you survived it, and that it no longer deserves space in your inner world. Healing accelerates when you stop allowing the past to interrupt your future. You'll eventually notice that healing makes you more grounded in your values. Betrayal forces you to examine what truly matters to you: honesty, loyalty, respect, consistency. The Stoics believed that values guide your character through adversity, and once you clarify them, you no longer tolerate what contradicts them. You start holding yourself to higher standards. You start holding others to higher standards. And you realize that losing people who can't meet those standards is not misfortune, it's protection. This clarity reshapes your relationships, your boundaries, and your expectations. There's also a powerful moment where you realize that your healing is not just about recovering from what happened, It's about transforming who you are becoming going forward. Stoicism teaches that adversity introduces you to yourself. You discover your strength, your resilience, your depth. You learn how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe, how to rebuild from the inside out. The betrayal becomes a catalyst, not a curse. It propels you toward emotional maturity, toward self-respect, toward higher purpose. You start living with more intention. You stop lowering your standards. You stop apologizing for protecting your peace. Another evolution takes place when you stop trying to rewrite the past and begin rewriting the story you tell yourself about it. Betrayal can make you feel unworthy, unseen, or undervalued if you let it. But with clarity, you begin to reinterpret the narrative. Instead of saying, "I wasn't enough," you say, "I deserved better." Instead of saying, "I was abandoned," you say, "I was redirected." Instead of saying, "I lost someone," you say, "I shed what was misaligned." Stoicism teaches that perception is everything. Once you change the story, the pain loses its power. You reclaim authorship of your own life. You also start realizing that not everyone who leaves your life is meant to be replaced. Some are meant to be lessons, some are meant to be memories, and some are meant to be reminders of who you no longer want to be. This understanding brings a sense of calm. Stoicism emphasizes acceptance, accepting that certain people were temporary characters in your long-term journey. And once you accept that their part is over, you stop searching for their presence in your future. Acceptance clears emotional space, and in that space, better relationships and healthier connections begin to form naturally. As you grow, you begin to notice that the most powerful form of healing is reclaiming the parts of yourself that you muted to keep someone else comfortable. Maybe you made yourself smaller to avoid conflict. Maybe you lowered your expectations to preserve the relationship. Maybe you ignored your intuition to maintain peace. Betrayal forces these patterns into the light, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Stoicism teaches that self-awareness is the first step toward liberation. You begin speaking up more. You begin honoring your boundaries. You begin trusting your own perception. You stop betraying yourself just to avoid being betrayed by others. There comes a moment where your healing starts to feel like empowerment instead of recovery. You start waking up with more clarity, more confidence, more control over your emotional world. What once broke you now builds you. What once defined you now strengthens you. The person who once hurt you becomes irrelevant to your growth. They may exist in your story, but they no longer exist in your energy. This is where healing becomes transformation, a quiet, steady rising that happens within you, not because of them and not in spite of them, but entirely for yourself. Healing deepens when you begin to understand that the pain you experienced is not your identity, it's your initiation. Betrayal has a way of making you feel defined by what happened to you, as if your entire sense of self becomes attached to the wound. But over time, you start recognizing that the pain was a chapter, not the whole book. Stoic philosophy teaches that your identity is shaped not by what you endure, but by how you rise. Once this truth settles into your bones, you no longer introduce yourself to life as someone who was betrayed. You introduce yourself as someone who evolved, someone who grew, someone who made it through something heavy and is now lighter because of it. There's also a moment when you begin to appreciate the emotional distance healing creates. At first, the distance feels cold, unfamiliar, even unsettling. But gradually, it becomes clarity. The further you move from the betrayal, the more clearly you can see the truth of the situation. The illusions fall away. The excuses you once made for them dissolve. The hope that they would change fades into neutrality. You begin to see that the person you once cared about may not have had the emotional capacity to care for you in the way you deserved. And in that clarity comes relief. Not because you no longer feel pain, but because you no longer carry confusion. Another profound shift happens when you realize that your healing can coexist with unanswered questions. Some betrayals leave holes, empty spaces where explanations should be. You may never fully understand why they did what they did. You may never know the whole truth. But Stoicism teaches that certainty is not a requirement for peace. You don't need all the answers to move forward. You don't need full closure to heal. You don't need them to fill in the gaps they created. Peace comes from releasing the need for resolution and accepting the situation as it is. You stop trying to solve a puzzle whose missing pieces belong to someone who is no longer part of your life. As you grow stronger, you'll notice that your self-worth becomes less flexible. Before the betrayal, you may have bent your standards, ignored your intuition, or accepted less than you deserved. But healing stiffens the spine. Stoicism teaches that dignity is self-made, and betrayal is often the catalyst that brings it forward. You begin to carry yourself differently. You begin to speak your truth without trembling. You begin to treat yourself with the respect you once reserved for others. The betrayal becomes the moment you finally decided to choose yourself fully. And once you choose yourself, your tolerance for disrespect disappears. Healing also introduces you to a new kind of resilience, the quiet kind that doesn't need validation from anyone. You no longer look to the person who hurt you to recognize your growth. You don't need them to see how much stronger you've become. You don't need their apology to validate your progress. Stoicism teaches that real strength is internal, not external. You hold your resilience close, like a shield forged in fire. You rise, not for them, not to prove a point, but because rising is who you are. Their recognition becomes irrelevant. Your evolution becomes undeniable. There comes a moment where you begin to understand that your forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not the person who wronged you. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation, trust, or even communication. It requires release. Release of the anger, the resentment, the emotional weight that keeps you tied to the past. Stoicism teaches that carrying resentment is like drinking poison, expecting someone else to feel the pain. When you forgive, you free your heart. You allow yourself to breathe again. You make peace with your past so it can stop interrupting your future. Forgiveness becomes an act of self-respect, not mercy. Another transformation happens when you start finding joy again in the little things. At first, it feels small, a laugh that doesn't feel forced, a moment of peace that doesn't feel fragile, a thought of the betrayal that no longer stings. Stoicism teaches that true joy comes from the present moment, not from external validation. Healing brings you back into the fullness of the now. You begin noticing the warmth of the sun, the comfort of your routines, the stability in your breathing. Life starts feeling meaningful again, not because the betrayal didn't matter, but because you decided that it would not define the rest of your days. You eventually reach a point where the betrayal stops feeling like a story about what someone did to you and starts feeling like a story about what you overcame. The narrative shifts, the power shifts, the weight shifts, the focus shifts from the person who hurt you to the strength that rose from within you. Stoicism teaches that adversity is the birthplace of courage. Your courage grows quietly, steadily, confidently. And with time, you begin to appreciate that the pain led you here, to a stronger, wiser, more self-aware version of yourself. At the end of this journey, when the echoes of the betrayal have faded and the lessons have settled into your bones, something profound becomes clear. You did not just survive what happened. You transformed because of it. You walked through something that once felt unbearable. And yet here you are, standing in a version of yourself that is wiser, calmer, and more resilient than you've ever been. The Stoics believed that every trial carries a hidden gift, and perhaps the greatest gift of all is discovering the strength that was inside you the entire time. Not the strength to avoid pain, but the strength to rise after it, the strength to choose peace over chaos. the strength to rebuild your life on your own terms. And now, as your story continues forward, you begin to recognize that the betrayal you once thought would break you actually revealed a truth you needed to see. Your peace has always belonged to you, not to the person who hurt you, not to the moment that wounded you, not to the memories that tried to haunt you. Your peace is yours, and reclaiming it is one of the greatest victories of your life. You learned to let go without losing yourself. You learned to forgive without forgetting your worth. You learned to protect your heart without closing it. And you learned that healing is not a return to who you were. It's an evolution into who you are meant to be. So as you step into the next chapter, carry this truth with you. What others did is their story. What you choose next is yours. Let your next chapter be written with intention, with courage, and with a calm heart that no longer trembles at the thought of the past. Your future is bigger than the betrayal. Your growth is louder than the pain. And your peace is stronger than you realize. If this message helped you heal, helped you see your situation with clearer eyes, or helped you remember your own strength, then take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to PSYCHOVEST. Your support helps this community grow and helps more people find the peace, perspective, and power they deserve. You've come this far. Keep going. Your peace awaits you.